My name is King Vassal bin Hamdan. I am 85 years old, and on the morning of 7th April, 2019, I should have been beheaded in the execution courtyard outside Riyadh for the crime of apostasy. Instead, an unexplainable darkness consumed the sky, and a violent wind split the execution block in two at the exact moment the executioner's blade was raised above my neck. Let me tell you how a Saudi king, who had ruled for over 4 decades, came to kneel before death for reading a forbidden book. I was born into absolute power as the eldest son of the royal house of Hamdan. My childhood was not a childhood, it was preparation for sovereignty. While other boys played, I studied statecraft. While they dreamed of adventure, I memorized the burden of command. By the time most men are learning their first trade, I commanded ministries. By my 40s, I ruled a nation of millions. My days began with a call to prayer and ended with decisions that shaped the destiny of my kingdom. For over 40 years, I was Allah's appointed servant king, defender of the faith, guardian of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. World leaders bowed in my presence. Religious clerics sought my counsel. Enemies trembled at my name. I signed treaties with a golden pen and death warrants with the same hand. Yet despite all the glory bestowed upon me by Allah over 8 decades of life, I felt like a man entombed in gold. From childhood, I had been immersed in Islamic law and tradition. I led prayers at the Grand Mosque, enforced Sharia with unwavering conviction, and ruled with the authority of heaven itself. My future was not uncertain, it was carved in stone. I would expand our influence, preserve our dynasty, and die with my name inscribed in the annals of great rulers. I had commanded nations for more than half my life. Yet I could not command the emptiness that haunted my nights. Why did unlimited authority feel like an invisible prison? Why did decades of prayers, millions of them, create only silence, never peace? Everything shattered on an ordinary afternoon in January 2018 during a private medical consultation at the palace. We were hosting a European medical delegation to advise on a national healthcare initiative, and I was performing my duty as the concerned, progressive monarch who embraced international cooperation. After the formal presentations concluded, one of the doctors, an elderly physician with trembling hands, perhaps only a decade younger than myself, collapsed from exhaustion in the conference hall. As my security detail rushed to clear the room and attend to him, I noticed something tumble from his coat pocket and slide across the marble floor. A small book. Brown leather. Worn edges. As I bent to retrieve it, intending to have it returned to him, my fingers traced the embossed letters on the cover. Holy Bible. Something about this forbidden text called to me like a voice across an impossible distance. Every fiber of my training, 8 decades of absolute adherence to Islamic law, demanded I summon security immediately. Protocol required its destruction. The law I had sworn to uphold left no exceptions, especially not for a king who must set the example. But instead, I slipped it inside my royal robe. That night, I locked myself in my private study, a place where even my most trusted advisors could not enter without permission, and opened the book with hands that betrayed my composure. My eyes fell on words from the Gospel of Mark, and I read a question that seemed to reach through centuries to interrogate my very soul. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, and lose his soul? These weren't the words of a minor prophet or a moral teacher. This was a question that knew me, that had been waiting for me for 85 years. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding. How dare these words see into the hollow place I had hidden from everyone, even myself? For 6 months, I conducted secret reading sessions in that study, dismissing guards and bolting every door. I devoured the Gospels like a man who had been starving for 8 decades, but didn't know the name of his hunger. I read about a king who rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, not a war horse. A ruler who washed the feet of his followers instead of commanding them to wash his. A God who chose execution on a cross instead of conquest from a throne. Everything about Jesus contradicted everything I had known about power for 85 years. Yet he didn't sound weak. He sounded terrifyingly, devastatingly true. I hid the Bible behind state documents and read between signing laws and receiving foreign dignitaries. I would close my eyes during council meetings, and instead of hearing policy debates, I would hear Jesus saying, "Blessed are the merciful." I would sentence men according to Sharia law by day, then read by candlelight about Jesus pardoning the adulteress by night. The more power I wielded in Allah's name, the more powerless I felt in the presence of these words. But it was reading about the crucifixion in late June 2018 that finally broke something inside me that no amount of authority and no amount of time could protect. Here was the God of the universe, choosing to suffer, to bleed, to die, for people who rejected him, mocked him, murdered him. Have you ever encountered a truth so profound that 85 years of certainty became a lie by comparison? One evening in July, alone on the marble floor of my palace study, I did something no Saudi king had ever done. My knees, which had never bent before any man in 85 years, touched the ground. My voice, which had commanded armies for decades, whispered a prayer that could cost me everything. Jesus, if you are real, if you are who these pages say you are, show me the truth. No thunder answered. No angels appeared. No voice spoke from heaven. But something far more undeniable filled that room. Peace. Not the peace of a resolved conflict or a satisfied ambition. This was peace that had weight, heavier than my crown, deeper than my authority, more real than the marble beneath my knees. For the first time in 85 years, King Faisal bin Hamdan was not alone in his own soul. I had no idea how much that moment of peace would cost me. Because in palaces, secrets don't stay secret for long. And the penalty for apostasy in Saudi Arabia has only one sentence: death. Not even an 85-year-old king who had ruled for over 4 decades could escape it. But to understand how I reached that execution courtyard, you need to know who I was before the Bible. You need to understand the king I had been for 85 years. I was born into power the way other men are born into poverty. It wasn't chosen. It simply was. My first breath was taken in a palace. My first cry was answered by servants. From the moment I emerged into this world, I was not just a child. I was an heir. A future. A destiny wrapped in royal cloth. Other boys grew up playing games and dreaming dreams. I grew up memorizing the weight of crowns I would one day wear. My tutors didn't teach me to question. They taught me to command. They didn't encourage curiosity. They demanded obedience. Faith wasn't something to explore. It was something to enforce. By the time I was 5, I could recite portions of the Quran. By 10, I understood the machinery of power. By 15, I had witnessed my first execution and signed my first decree. Leadership before compassion. Authority before mercy. These were the pillars of my education. I was not raised to be a man. I was raised to be a king. By my 20s, I commanded entire ministries. Men twice my age bored when I entered rooms. Decisions that affected millions crossed my desk before breakfast. By my 40s, the crown was placed on my head, and I ruled a nation of 34 million souls. For over 4 decades, I sat on that throne. The world knew me as King Faisal bin Hamdan, Allah's servant king, defender of the faith, guardian of Mecca and Medina. When I spoke, parliaments listened. When I visited foreign capitals, presidents and prime ministers stood in reception lines. Religious scholars sought my blessing. Enemies whispered my name with fear. I signed trade agreements worth billions. I commanded armies. I shaped laws that governed every aspect of my people's lives: how they prayed, how they married, how they died. I was power personified. But power, I learned, is the loneliest throne of all. When the palace lights dimmed and the crowds dispersed, when the clerics stopped chanting and the advisors stopped advising, I was left with something I could never admit to anyone. Silence. Not the peaceful silence of contentment. The haunting silence of emptiness. I would lie awake in my royal chambers, surrounded by gold, draped in silk, guarded by armed men, and feel absolutely nothing. No peace. No joy. No satisfaction. Just a vast, echoing void where something vital should have been. I told myself this was normal. This was the burden of leadership. Kings are not meant to sleep easily. The weight of a nation doesn't rest lightly on any man's shoulders. These were the lies I whispered to myself in the darkness. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. After 85 years of life, after 8 decades of Islamic devotion, after 40 years of absolute rule, after millions of prayers recited and thousands of decisions made in Allah's name, I was starving. Not for food. Not for wealth. Not for more power. I was starving for something I didn't have words for. Something that all my authority couldn't command into existence. Something that all my prayers couldn't summon from heaven. I was powerful, yet hollow. Feared, yet restless. Complete on the outside, empty on the inside. I had spent 85 years building a kingdom on earth, while my own soul remained a wasteland. I had commanded millions, but couldn't command peace in my own heart. I had enforced divine law, but had never felt divinity. And the most terrifying part? I had believed this was as good as it gets. That this emptiness was simply what life felt like at the top. That kings were meant to be lonely. That power was meant to isolate. I was wrong. But I wouldn't discover how wrong until a small leather book fell from an old doctor's pocket and landed at my feet. That book would show me what I had been starving for. And it would cost me everything. January 2018 began like any other month in my 85 years. Diplomatic ceremonies, state councils, the endless rhythm of power. We were hosting a European medical delegation to discuss advancements in healthcare infrastructure. It was political theater, really. I would play the progressive monarch, they would offer expertise, and both sides would gain favorable press. The delegation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Among them was an elderly physician, Dr. Henrik Larsson from Denmark. I noticed him immediately because he reminded me of myself, aged, dignified, but visibly tired. He was perhaps 75, a full decade younger than me, yet he looked exhausted in a way I recognized. The weight of years lived in service to something larger than yourself leaves marks that crowns cannot hide. The formal presentations dragged on for hours. Technical discussions about hospital systems, pharmaceutical supply chains, disease prevention protocols. I nodded at appropriate moments, asked educated questions, played my role perfectly. Then, without warning, Dr. Larsson collapsed. One moment he was standing beside a projection screen. The next, his legs buckled and he crumpled to the marble floor like a puppet with cut strings. His trembling hands, I'd noticed them earlier, reached for nothing as he fell. Chaos erupted instantly. My security detail rushed forward, barking orders. Palace physicians were summoned. The other delegates hovered uselessly, speaking rapid Swedish and English. I stood from my seat, projecting calm authority while my guards cleared the room. That's when I saw it. As they lifted Dr. Larsson onto a stretcher, something tumbled from his coat pocket and slid across the polished floor, stopping just inches from my feet. A small book. Brown leather. Worn edges that spoke of frequent use. I bent down, my joints protesting with the familiar ache of 85 years, and picked it up instinctively. The leather was soft, warm from being carried close to the doctor's body. My thumb traced the cover, and then I saw the words embossed in faded gold letters. Holy Bible. My chest tightened. My breath caught. Time seemed to suspend itself. This was the most dangerous object in my kingdom. More dangerous than weapons. More threatening than treason. In my nation, possessing this book carried mandatory penalties. For common citizens, imprisonment, flogging. For converts, death. I had enforced these laws for 40 years. I had watched men executed for less. Protocol was absolute. After 85 years of upholding Islamic law, I knew exactly what should happen. Summon security immediately, confiscate the contraband, ensure its public destruction. As king, I had to set the example. No exceptions. Not for foreign diplomats. Certainly not for me. My mouth opened to call for the guards. But the words never came. Instead, something I still cannot fully explain happened. My hands that had signed death warrants, commanded armies, ruled nations, moved with their own volition. I slipped the Bible inside my royal robe, concealing it against my chest. The room continued its chaos around me. No one noticed. No one saw. I had just committed apostasy by possession. That night, I locked myself in my private study, the one room in the entire palace where even my most trusted advisors could not enter uninvited. My hands shook as I bolted the door. At 85, I had long ago stopped feeling nervous about anything. But this was different. I sat at my desk and placed the Bible in front of me. The soft lamplight made the gold lettering shimmer. For several minutes, I simply stared at it, my heart pounding in a way it hadn't in decades. Then I opened it. The pages fell open randomly. I learned later this was the Gospel of Mark. My eyes scanned the English text until they landed on words that seemed to leap off the page. For what shall it profit a man, if he shall gain the whole world, and lose his own soul? I slammed the book shut violently, as if it had burned my fingers. My breath came in short gasps. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool night air. Those words had no right to know me. No right to see into the hollow place I had hidden from the world for 85 years. No right to ask the exact question that haunted my sleepless nights. I had gained the whole world. Literally. I had ruled it for over 4 decades. But my soul. I opened the book again, my hands steadier now, my eyes hungry for something I couldn't name. And I began to read. I had no idea that this forbidden book would become more valuable to me than my crown, or that it would soon cost me both. I told myself I was reading it to understand the enemy. That's what I whispered to my conscience each night as I unlocked my study and retrieved the Bible from its hiding place behind a false panel in my bookshelf. I was studying Western thought to better defend against it. I was analyzing Christian theology to strengthen Islamic apologetics. I was doing my duty as defender of the faith. These were lies, and somewhere deep inside, I knew it. But they were necessary lies, the kind that let an 85-year-old king continue doing something that could cost him his crown, his legacy, his life. Night after night, I returned to those pages. I would finish evening prayers, dismiss my attendants, lock my study door, and read by lamplight until the call to Fajr prayer echoed across Riyadh before dawn. The Gospel accounts consumed me. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, each one revealing a man unlike anyone I had encountered in 85 years of life. Jesus was a king, the texts claimed. But everything about him contradicted everything I knew about kingship. He rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, not a war hearse, not in a golden chariot, but on a humble beast of burden while crowds waved palm branches. What kind of king chooses weakness as his entrance? He washed his disciples' feet, the task of the lowest servant, while they reclined at dinner. I had never washed anyone's feet in my entire life. People washed mine. He spoke about turning the other cheek, loving enemies, blessing those who cursed you. I had built a reign on strength, on decisive justice, on making examples of those who opposed the kingdom. Yet here was a king who let himself be mocked, beaten, spat upon, and responded with forgiveness. At first, I thought he sounded weak. But the more I read, the more terrifying the truth became. Jesus didn't sound weak at all. He sounded devastatingly, powerfully, impossibly true in a way that 85 years of Islamic teaching never had. His words had weight. Authority. They didn't demand obedience. They invited transformation. They didn't threaten punishment. They offered love. And that love felt more dangerous to my carefully constructed world than any army I had ever faced. I became elaborate in my concealment. I hid the Bible behind state documents in my desk. I would read a page while reviewing economic reports. I would memorize passages between signing death warrants and hosting diplomatic meetings. During council sessions, while advisors debated policy, I would silently recite the Beatitudes I had read the night before. My life split into two kingdoms, the one I ruled by day, and the one that was conquering me by night. The paradox grew unbearable. The more power I wielded in Allah's name, the more laws I enforced, the more authority I exercised, the more powerless I felt when I opened that book. Every decree I signed seemed hollow. Every prayer I led felt like theater. Every public affirmation of Islamic faith felt like betraying something true I was beginning to glimpse. Then I reached the crucifixion accounts. It was late June, perhaps 2 in the morning. The palace was silent except for the distant footsteps of night guards. I read about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweating blood, asking if there was any other way. I read about the betrayal, the arrest, the mock trial before Pilate. And then I read about the cross. God Himself, if this account was true, choosing to be stripped, beaten, nailed to wood, and executed like a common criminal. Choosing to suffer for people who hated Him. Choosing to die for humanity's rebellion against Him. My hands began to shake. These hands that had signed countless death sentences over 40 years of rule. These hands that had wielded absolute power. These hands were trembling like leaves in the desert wind. This wasn't religion. This was something else entirely. This was love that made no political sense. Love that gained nothing. Love that sacrificed everything. Before I fully realized what I was doing, I slid from my chair onto the marble floor. At 85 years old, my knees touched the ground for the first time in voluntary submission. Not in Islamic prayer. I had done that countless times. This was different. This was surrender to something, someone, beyond my control, beyond my authority, beyond my understanding. I had never knelt before any man in my entire life. Kings don't kneel. But I was kneeling now. Jesus, I whispered into the silence of my study, my voice cracking with 8 decades of suppressed hunger. If you are real, if you are who these pages say you are, show me the truth. I waited for thunder, for a voice from heaven, for some dramatic sign befitting a king's prayer. Nothing came. No angels appeared. No burning bush ignited. No audible voice spoke. But something far more undeniable filled that room, something heavier than my crown, more substantial than my throne, more real than the marble beneath my knees. Peace. Not the absence of conflict. Not the satisfaction of victory. This was peace that had presence, as if someone had entered the room and wrapped me in arms I couldn't see but could absolutely feel. After 85 years of religious practice, I had finally encountered God. And He was nothing like I had been taught. I should have known that secrets do not survive in palaces. Power breeds watchers. Authority attracts scrutiny. And an 85-year-old king who begins changing his patterns after 8 decades of predictability? That invites investigation. For 6 months, I managed the deception. I attended state functions, led Friday prayers, enforced Sharia with the same public conviction I always had. But privately, everything had shifted. My prayer times grew shorter. My study door remained locked for longer hours. Council meetings felt like interruptions to something more important happening in the silence of my private chamber. I thought I was being careful. I was wrong. My personal advisor was a man named Rashid Almazin. We had been raised together. He the son of my father's closest friend, me the crown prince. For over 5 decades, he had served at my side. He knew my habits better than I knew them myself. He could read my moods in the set of my shoulders, predict my decisions before I announced them. Which meant he noticed when I began to change. The locked doors. The distracted silences during meetings. The way my eyes would drift during religious ceremonies, as if I were hearing different words than the ones being spoken. The shortened prayers that once lasted 30 minutes now concluded in 15. One evening in late July, Rashid entered my study unannounced. I had grown careless, so absorbed in reading about Paul's conversion on the Damascus road that I didn't hear his approach. The Bible lay open on my desk, illuminated by lamplight, impossible to miss. Our eyes met. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The silence stretched like a chasm opening between us, 50 years of friendship teetering on its edge. I expected shouting, accusation, immediate summons of the guards. Instead, Rashid's face crumpled. Tears spilled down his weathered cheeks. His shoulders shook. He didn't speak. He wept. Deep, broken sobs that came from somewhere beyond words. His grief cut deeper than any anger could have. "How could you?" he finally whispered. "After everything, how could you?" I had no answer that would satisfy him. What could I say? That I had found something more true than everything we'd been taught? That Jesus had given me peace after 85 years of emptiness? He would hear only betrayal. Only apostasy. Rashid left without another word. The machinery of power moves swiftly when it senses weakness. Within hours, the Council of Religious Scholars was convened in emergency session. Within a day, the royal court received confidential briefings. Within 3 days, a carefully worded statement was released to the nation. King Faisal bin Hamdan had fallen gravely ill and would be stepping back from public duties temporarily for medical treatment. The nation mourned their ailing 85-year-old king. They had no idea he was being systematically dismantled. Within 2 weeks, a private tribunal of senior clerics and royal family members delivered their verdict. The king had committed apostasy. The evidence was undeniable. The Bible had been seized from my study, my marginalia in the pages proving extensive reading and engagement. Then came the charge that no king survives, regardless of how many decades he has ruled or how old he has grown. Apostasy against Islam. The law I had enforced for 40 years knew no mercy, not for royalty, not for age, not for past service. In fact, it demanded exactly the opposite. A king's apostasy required the harshest punishment to demonstrate that Allah's law stood above all earthly authority. The example had to be absolute. My crown was formally removed for the stability and spiritual integrity of the kingdom. My sons, men in their 50s and 60s, were forbidden to see me or speak my name publicly. The clerics erased my name from Friday prayers, as if 85 years of existence could be redacted from history. Royal portraits were taken down. Decrees I had signed were reissued under my successor's seal. The man who had ruled millions for over 4 decades was placed in chains. They transported me in darkness to a military detention facility beneath the compound where I had once reviewed troops and received foreign dignitaries. Stone walls. No windows. A single bare bulb. A concrete floor that ached against my old bones. From absolute authority to absolute abandonment in less than a month. At 85 years old, I learned that earthly kingdoms are built on sand. Loyalty evaporates when faith is questioned. Power dissolves the moment you stop enforcing it. Legacy means nothing when law demands your death. I sat in that cell, my joints aching, my royal robes replaced with prison cloth, and remembered Jesus before Pilate, silent, stripped of dignity, abandoned by those who had followed him. He had warned about this. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, and take up their cross and follow me. I had picked up my cross. Now I would discover if I had the strength to carry it. The cell beneath the military complex was designed to break men. Stone walls wept with moisture. No windows permitted even a glimpse of sky. A single bulb burned overhead, never extinguished, never bright enough, existing only to deny the mercy of complete darkness. The air tasted of mold and decades of despair. For an 85-year-old man accustomed to silk sheets and climate-controlled chambers, the concrete floor was agony. My bones ached constantly. My joints swelled. Sleep came only in brief, painful intervals when exhaustion finally overpowered discomfort. But the physical suffering was nothing compared to the stripping of identity. I was no longer King Faisal bin Hamdan. That man had been erased as thoroughly as if he'd never existed. No one addressed me by name. No one used my title. To the guards, I was simply the prisoner. To the clerics who came to interrogate me, I was the apostate. To the state, I was the condemned. 85 years of identity dissolved like salt in water. Days blurred together in that darkness. I lost track of time. Whether it had been 1 week or 3 since my imprisonment, I couldn't say. The only interruptions to the crushing solitude were the twice-daily delivery of plain rice and water, and the occasional visit from clerics demanding I recant. I refused. Each refusal brought the same question, whispered in the darkness when I was alone. Was it worth it? I had lost everything. The throne I'd occupied for over 40 years, gone. My family, forbidden to acknowledge me. My legacy, being systematically erased. My life, soon to be taken. Everything that had defined 85 years of existence had been stripped away. For what? 6 months of reading a forbidden book? A moment of peace on my study floor? In the darkness, doubt came like a flood. Had I been deceived? Had I thrown away a kingdom for a fantasy? Had loneliness and old age made me vulnerable to spiritual delusion? But then I would remember Jesus before Pilate. The accounts I'd read described him standing silent, while false accusations flew. Stripped of his clothes, crowned with thorns in mockery, beaten until flesh hung in ribbons from his back. His own disciples had abandoned him. Peter, his closest friend, denied even knowing him. Yet the gospel writers said Jesus remained unbroken. Not because he was stronger than his suffering, but because he knew something his tormentors didn't. He knew Friday's death would become Sunday's resurrection. He knew the cross wasn't the end, it was the doorway. In my cell, I whispered prayers into darkness. Jesus, you led me into this. Do not leave me now. If I must die for believing in you, then give me the strength to die well. Some days, peace came. I would feel that same presence I'd experienced in my study, invisible but undeniable, as if someone sat beside me in the darkness. Other days brought only silence and fear. Doubt would war with faith. Terror would wrestle with peace. I would lie on that concrete floor, my 85-year-old body trembling, wondering if I had the courage to face what was coming. Then, on what I later learned was 6th April, 2019, the guards came with different energy. Tomorrow at dawn, the senior guard announced, the sentence will be carried out. My execution had been scheduled. They gave me instructions, ritual washing at 4 a.m., final prayer if I wished to recant, transport to the courtyard at first light. Everything would be conducted according to Sharia law. Everything would be lawful, proper, just. Everything except the fact that they were executing an 85-year-old man for reading a book and finding truth. That night was the longest of my 85 years. I didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. I lay on the concrete floor, feeling every ache, every year, every fear. Dawn was coming. The executioner's sword was being sharpened. In hours, I would kneel in that courtyard, the same courtyard where I had once watched others die, and feel the blade fall. This was real. This was happening. The sun would rise, and I would die. I thought about my sons, forbidden to say goodbye. I thought about the palace I would never see again. I thought about 85 years of life about to end in a single stroke. And I thought about Jesus, who had walked this same path 2,000 years before me. If this is where following you leads, I whispered into the darkness, then I will follow. Even to death. Even at 85. Even now. Somewhere in the deepest hours of that night, peace came again. Not the peace of escape or rescue, the peace of surrender. The peace of knowing that some truths are worth dying for. The peace of knowing I would soon see the king I had chosen over my crown. Dawn was coming. And with it, either death or deliverance. I would discover which in just a few hours. They came for me at dawn. 2 guards entered my cell as the first hint of light touched the eastern sky. They said nothing. There was nothing left to say. I was 85 years old, my joints screaming as they pulled me to my feet, but I walked without resistance. The hood came first. Heavy black fabric that smelled of dust and old incense, pressed over my face until the world disappeared into darkness. Then my hands were bound behind my back, with rope that bit into my wrists. The guards led me through corridors I knew by heart, but could no longer see. We emerged into the execution courtyard. Even through the hood, I sensed where I was. The space echoed differently, open air instead of enclosed stone. I felt the desert wind on my arms, heard the shuffle of gathered witnesses, smelled the familiar scent of the palace grounds just beyond the walls. This courtyard. I knew it intimately. I had stood here dozens of times, on the platform, watching justice carried out. I had signed the death warrants. I had nodded to executioners. I had watched men kneel exactly where I was about to kneel. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. King Faisal bin Hamdan. A voice rang out, the chief judge's voice, formal and final. You have been found guilty of apostasy against Islam. By decree of the Council of Scholars and consent of the royal house, you are sentenced to death. May Allah have mercy on your soul. Hands pushed me down. My 85-year-old knees hit the platform with jarring pain. They positioned me over the execution block, that smooth wooden surface worn by the necks of condemned men before me. I heard the executioner approach. His shadow fell across me even through the hood. I heard the whisper of steel as the sword was raised. This was it. The final moment of 85 years. Then something impossible happened. The call to prayer should have sounded, the traditional signal for execution. It was supposed to echo across the courtyard, Allahu Akbar. But no call came. Instead, the sky darkened. Not the gradual dimming of clouds passing over the sun. This was instantaneous, as if someone had thrown a switch and extinguished the morning light. Through my hood, I sensed it. Around me, witnesses gasped. Then the wind came. Not a breeze. Not even a storm. This was wind with intention, violent, focused, supernatural. It roared through the courtyard with impossible force, a wall of air that hit like a physical blow. I heard men shouting, stumbling, crashing to the ground. The executioner's footsteps staggered backward. The sword clattered against stone. Horses screamed, terrible, primal sounds of animal terror. Guards shouted orders that were swallowed by the howling wind. Someone was praying frantically in Arabic, the words tumbling over themselves in fear. And then came the light. Even through the hood, I saw it, a brilliance that shouldn't exist, brighter than the desert sun at midday, searing and pure. It struck the execution platform like lightning without thunder, like the focal point of heaven's attention concentrated into a single beam. The wooden execution block exploded beneath me. Not burned, split. I heard it crack with a sound like a tree trunk breaking, felt the splinters scatter, felt the platform shake as if struck by an invisible hammer. My chains fell away. Not unlocked. Not cut. They simply fell, the ropes around my wrists dissolving as if they'd never existed. The hood slipped from my head, and I could see again. The courtyard was pandemonium. Soldiers scrambled away from the platform, abandoning their posts. The executioner had dropped his sword and fallen to his knees, hands covering his face. Clerics who had come to witness justice were now collapsed on the ground, some weeping, others frozen in terror. The sky churned with unnatural darkness shot through with that impossible light. And then I heard it, not with my ears, but deeper than hearing. A voice that didn't need sound to be absolute. You do not belong to death. Not a suggestion. Not a comfort. A statement of fact spoken with the authority that created galaxies and numbered every star. I stood. At 85 years old, on a shattered execution platform, surrounded by chaos, I stood, unchained, unhooded, unharmed, alive. The wind began to settle. The light faded. The darkness lifted as suddenly as it had come, revealing a normal April morning, Except nothing about this morning was normal. Soldiers were fleeing through the courtyard gates. Clerics stumbled away, their faces white with terror. Witnesses scattered in every direction, desperate to escape whatever power had just invaded their orderly execution. The executioner's sword lay abandoned at my feet. I looked down at my wrists, unmarked, as if the ropes had never existed. I looked at the split execution block, its wood grain exposed where something beyond nature had torn it apart. And I understood. God had not merely saved me. He had made a statement that everyone present would remember for the rest of their lives. Some powers bow to no earthly kingdom. Some kings answer to a higher throne. The chaos in that courtyard bought me exactly what I needed: time. While soldiers scrambled to restore order, while clerics argued about what they had witnessed, while the royal court received frantic reports of supernatural events they could never publicly acknowledge, I simply walked away. An 85-year-old man in prison clothes, walking through an open gate that guards had abandoned in their terror. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. They were all too busy trying to explain the unexplainable. I made it perhaps half a kilometer before exhaustion and reality hit simultaneously. I was free, yes, but free to go where? Every face in this kingdom knew mine. Every checkpoint would recognize me. I had no money, no documents, no resources beyond the prison garments I wore. I was standing on a deserted street corner, contemplating my impossible situation, when a small car pulled alongside me. The window rolled down. A woman's voice, speaking Arabic with a slight accent. "King Faisal, get in. Quickly." I should have been suspicious. I should have questioned. But something in her eyes, a knowing, a peace I recognized, made me trust. I got in. "Who are you?" I asked as she pulled away. "A sister in Christ," she said simply. "We've been praying for you since your arrest. We knew this day would come." I learned there was an underground church in Saudi Arabia, believers who had been secretly following Jesus for years, meeting in homes, praying in whispers, living double lives at enormous risk. When news of my imprisonment spread through their network, they had been interceding for me. When reports of the supernatural event at the execution reached them, they mobilized immediately. For the next 72 hours, I was passed through a chain of safe houses, Christian families who risked everything to hide a condemned king. They cut my distinctive beard. They gave me common clothes. They procured forged documents identifying me as an elderly businessman named Ahmad al-Rashid. The journey to the border was treacherous. Every checkpoint meant potential recognition. Every encounter with authorities could mean death, not just for me, but for everyone helping me. At 85, I was not built for this. My body ached. My heart raced dangerously. Several times I wanted to surrender simply to stop the physical ordeal. But the believers kept me moving, kept me hidden, kept me praying. "Just a little farther, brother," they would whisper. "Jesus didn't bring you through execution to abandon you at a checkpoint." The border crossing into Jordan happened at night, a treacherous desert route away from official gates, guided by Bedouin believers who knew every rock and wadi. When we finally crossed into safety, I collapsed. I had escaped. But what, exactly, had I escaped to? Everything that defined 85 years of existence remained behind that border. My nation, gone. My identity, erased. My family, unreachable. My legacy, destroyed. 8 decades of history, 4 decades of rule, all of it left behind in a kingdom that now wanted me dead. I was nobody. An elderly refugee with forged papers and borrowed clothes. The processing took weeks. Christian organizations helped resettle me in a European country I cannot name for security reasons. They provided a small apartment, a modest stipend, a new identity. I became simply Faisal. No royal lineage, no title, no power. At 85 years old, I had to learn to live as an ordinary man. To shop for my own food. To clean my own space. To walk streets where no one bowed, No one recognized me. No one cared that I had once commanded millions. It was the strangest freedom I had ever known. I would sit in my small apartment, so different from my palace, and marvel at the exchange I had made. I had lost a gold crown. I had gained a kingdom that cannot be overthrown. I had lost earthly authority. I had gained eternal citizenship. The crown I wore for 40 years was temporary. The life I found through Jesus is forever. Sometimes, late at night, I think about my sons, men in their 60s now, forbidden to speak my name. I think about the grandson I'll never meet. I think about advisors who served me faithfully, now required to forget I existed. The cost was real. The loss was profound. But so was the gain. I had spent 85 years searching for something that power couldn't provide, that wealth couldn't purchase, that authority couldn't command. I found it in a forbidden book that fell at my feet. I found it in a crucified king who died so I could live. And I discovered something that should give hope to everyone watching this. It's never too late. Not at 85. Not at any age. Some books are worth losing everything for. Some truths are worth dying for. Some kings are worth living for. Even when you are an old man with nothing left but faith. Especially then. Today, I live under a different name in a country I cannot reveal. I am 85 years old, or perhaps 86 now. I've lost precise track of time in this new life. My apartment is small, my possessions few. I have no servants, no guards, no advisors. I shop at local markets where no one recognizes me. I ride public buses where no one bows. I am nobody to the world around me. But I belong to a kingdom that cannot be overthrown. This is the truth I need you to understand. I once ruled an earthly nation for over 40 years. I commanded armies, shaped laws, controlled wealth beyond imagination. But that kingdom was built on sand. One accusation, one betrayal, one forbidden book, and it all collapsed. The kingdom I belong to now has stood for 2,000 years. Empires have tried to destroy it. Dictators have tried to erase it. Death itself couldn't stop it. And it will still be standing when every earthly throne has turned to dust. The crown I lost was gold. Beautiful, heavy, impressive, and utterly temporary. The life I gained is eternal. Was it worth it? Every day, I answer that question the same way. Yes. Yes, it was worth losing my throne to find my king. Yes, it was worth losing my family to join God's family. Yes, it was worth losing my legacy to gain eternity. Every sacrifice, every loss, every cost, worth it. Even at 85. Even in the final years of my life. Even now. My work today looks nothing like it did before. I no longer sign decrees or host diplomats. Instead, I serve the underground church, the secret believers in hostile lands who risk everything for Jesus. I counsel them through encrypted messages. I encourage pastors who lead house churches in nations where Christianity is forbidden. I pray for families choosing between their faith and their safety. These are my people now. Not subjects who bow to my authority, but brothers and sisters who share my surrender to Christ. And if you are watching this in secret, if you are in Iran, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, North Korea, or any place where following Jesus could cost you everything, I want you to hear this directly. I am living proof that He is worth it. I had more to lose than almost anyone. I was 85 years old with a legacy spanning nearly a century. I ruled a nation. I had sons, grandsons, wealth, power, respect. I lost it all. And I would make the same choice again tomorrow. If an 85-year-old king who ruled for 4 decades can surrender his throne for Jesus, then it's never too late for you. It doesn't matter how many years you've spent living another way. It doesn't matter how deeply embedded you are in another faith. It doesn't matter how old you are or how much you have to lose. Jesus meets you where you are. He met me in a palace at 85. He'll meet you wherever you are watching this. Some books are worth losing everything for. Some truths are worth dying for. Some kings are worth living for. Whether you are 18 or 85, whether you have everything or nothing, whether you are powerful or powerless, Jesus is worth the cost. The kingdom of God is worth the crown of earth. I know because I made that exchange. And not a single day goes by where I regret it. If you are searching right now, if you are afraid but curious, if you are reading the Bible in secret like I did, if you are feeling that same hunger for something your religion can't satisfy, don't wait. I wasted 85 years before I found the truth. Don't waste another day. The kingdom that received an 85-year-old apostate king will receive you. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what you'll have to leave behind. Jesus split an execution block in two to save me. He'll move heaven and earth to save you. Before I close, I want to ask you to do something. If this testimony touched you, if it gave you hope, if it made you think differently about what's possible, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere in the world right now, there's someone sitting where I sat. Someone powerful who feels empty. Someone old who thinks it's too late. Someone afraid who thinks the cost is too high. They need to know, Jesus intervenes. Even for 85-year-old kings. Even in execution courtyards. Even when all hope seems lost. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. What time is it there? Are you free to worship openly? Or are you watching in secret? Your story matters. Your courage matters. And remember this, the same Jesus who gave me peace in a palace study, who split my chains in an execution courtyard, who led me to freedom through impossible circumstances, that Jesus is alive today. He's watching you right now. He knows your name. He knows your hunger. And He's calling you into a kingdom that cannot fall. My name was King Faisal bin Hamdan. I ruled for over 40 years. I lost everything at 85. And I found the only thing that matters. Some crowns are worth losing. Some kings are worth dying for. Jesus is both. It's never too late.